Well, folks, in this edition of the 700 Club, we've got a treat for you today. The Grand Illumination at Founders Inn. It's a lovely time. All the little children gathered around. We read the Christmas story. It was really nice.
It's so beautiful over there at this time of the year. I mean, when you flip that switch, it's like the Wonderland comes to life.
It was fun. And, you know, you hold it and you hope the thing works. And I've got this big switch, so we count down.
Don't tell that part.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, and you hit it, and it's illuminating. But it'll be beautiful. We've got it for you today. Well, it's crunch time for Republicans in the Senate. This is the week they hope to pass their crucial tax reform bill. The future of the economy and control of Congress could both hang in the balance of this important day.
Well, President Trump is heading to Capitol Hill today to lobby Republican senators personally to finish the bill. Dale Hurd has the story.
In Washington, the Christmas rush is on to pass tax reform before the end of the year. But it won't be easy.
Will you get this done by Christmas, Senator?
I hope so.
Some say they better get it done. President Trump's year-end agenda hangs in the balance, as do Republican chances in 2018.
We're going to give the American people a huge tax cut for Christmas. Hopefully that will be a great, big, beautiful Christmas present.
But this is primarily about both boosting the economy as well as having a signature accomplishment going into the 2018 elections.
The goal is to get the economy growing again, to get people with a little more take-home pay they can spend the way they see fit or save it for their retirement, and to make the United States economy competitive in a global economy.
Trump and GOP leaders are scrambling to make changes to the Senate version to woo several Republican holdouts. Republicans have only 2 votes to spare in the Senate. If just 3 Republicans oppose it, the bill will fail.
If you don't get to 50, what's plan B?
Senators, the CBO
We intend to get to 50.
Mr. Chairman, are you concerned about the major differences between the Senate and House tax plans?
No, because we're generally able to get together and solve these problems, and I think we will.
In a sign that Republicans are preparing to compromise, Senator Rand Paul wrote in an opinion column for Fox News, "I'm not getting everything I want, far from it, but I've been immersed in this process. I've fought for and received major changes for the better, and I plan to vote for this bill as it stands right now." Among the holdouts are deficit hawks who worry that tax cuts for businesses and individuals would add to the nation's mounting $20 trillion debt. So the final bill may contain a trigger mechanism to increase taxes if federal deficits start to go up. All this is happening amid a backdrop of more and more members of Congress facing sexual harassment charges. And with Republicans holding such a slim majority in the Senate, President Trump hasn't expressly endorsed embattled Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore, but he has been attacking his Democratic opponent. But while sexual harassment dominates the headlines, the Senate is focusing on its own priority, hoping to pass a tax reform bill this week so the details can be worked out with the House and the president can sign the bill by the end of the year. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
I hope the senators realize that their future as controlling the government depends on their vote. And if they fail to vote this tax relief through, they will go down. And as somebody said, there'll be a whole lot of Uber drivers who are ex-congressmen and ex-senators. I think that it's crucial, and they need to recognize it. But there have been some scoring. The liberal groups, I noticed, had shown the economy growing at like 1.9% GDP a year, which is way below the historic average. The historic average should be 3.5% or even more. And with this tax cut, it will grow. And with that, there'll be so much more money that the government will be able to pay the bills faster. So it's not a question of throwing money away. It's a question of a stimulus that will bring more revenue. Now they're talking about a trigger. Well, if that doesn't happen, we'll have a trigger in place. But if a trigger is in place, people will say, well, I still can't invest. I can't do what I want to do because it may be that the government will revoke all these tax goodies that they put in this bill. So it's going to be a very difficult thing. Well, keeping government spending under control, of course, is one of the key sticking points on that reform bill. But is Washington doing a good job with the money it already has? one senator is highlighting some expensive mistakes Congress made this year. And our Abigail Robertson brings us that story from Washington.
A production of Doggy Hamlet might sound cute, but should federal taxpayers really pay $30,000 for it? Senator James Lankford exposes 100 federal fumbles in this report, where he shows how wasteful federal spending costs taxpayers more than $470 billion this year.
We identified them, try to be able to put them out and say, how do we fix this? Not just this individual piece, but the bigger piece so we can get on top of our debt and deficit.
Among this year's most eye-opening discoveries, an $85 million loan to build a hotel in Kabul, Afghanistan. $2.6 million for research on how stickleback fish adapt to different environments. And $40,000 to study 60 Syrian refugees living in Iceland. Also in the report, examples of government inefficiency and wrongdoing at taxpayers' expense. Case in point, the Defense Department's inability to track down more than $1 billion worth of equipment purchased for Iraqi security forces. And with all the evidence of wasteful spending, Lankford pointed out how damaged houses of worship can't get federal disaster help.
FEMA does grants for disaster for all nonprofits except for houses of worship. So if your church is damaged in a disaster, you can't get federal assistance like other nonprofits can get because FEMA specifically discriminates against houses of worship.
Lankford says the next challenge is fixing the chaotic budget process.
All of these are examples to say this is an example of the problem, but the problem is a bigger issue, and it's the process itself and how it comes together.
Congress has only stuck to their budget 4 times in the last 40 years. One of the main causes putting our national debt at over $20 trillion and our 2017 deficit at $666 billion. As Republicans move on tax reform, some lawmakers have expressed concern about what impact tax cuts could have on our national debt and deficit. But Lankford hopes cuts will boost the economy enough to offset the deficit.
If you reduce taxes a little bit, not a lot, if you reduce taxes a little bit, it increases the economic health of the nation. That's a positive thing, and it offsets. My goal is to say we reduce taxes enough that we can still take care of debt and deficit, but we also can help strengthen the economy.
Although many details of the tax plan are still being worked out, Senator Lankford tells me he's confident meaningful tax reform will be in place by January 1st. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Well, our CBN News chief political correspondent David Brody is with us now. And David, what's the latest you hear from the wrangling over this tax bill?
Couple things, Pat. Let's get right to the bottom line here. 2 senior staffers telling me this morning in the Senate, telling me that it is a 95 chance percentage-wise that this bill will come out of the Senate, that it will pass at some point. The question is when exactly. Will it be this week? Will it be next week? I'm hearing 50-50 that the vote will be this week. You know, we've heard for a while if this vote was going to be either Thursday night, possibly on Friday in the Senate. However, on Capitol Hill, President Trump will go up to the Hill to talk to senior staff. He'll actually talk to all senators. And at that point, a determination will be made as to whether or not they need about another week or so until a final vote is held. So we'll see. That's the bottom line. What they're wrangling about. Look, you've got John McCain, Jeff Flake, Bob Corker. These are deficit hawks. They want to see the deficit get under control in this bill. It's not going to happen. It's 1.5 or so trillion over the next decade in terms of the deficit increasing. On the other side, you've got Ron Johnson and some other folks, Senator Ron Johnson, who wants a lower corporate tax rate, or a lower tax rate, I should say, for pass-through companies. And so you've got the yin and the yang poll. I think the bottom line here, though, Pat, is that most senators here want to get to yes. And as you know how the Senate works, if they want to get to yes, they'll get to yes, especially if they want to save their jobs.
Well, I think saving the jobs is the key. What kind of changes do you think we're going to look for?
Well, I think the trigger that we've heard about in Dale's piece, and you mentioned it as well, I mean, that's the key. Tax rates would then have to go up at some point. That's what Corker and Flake and a lot of the deficit hawks want. They want those tax rates to go up. That's the backdrop, if you will, or the backstop, I should say, in case the economy doesn't continue to go humming along at about 3% or so. That's the big wrangle on one side. And then the other part of it is a lower, as I was saying a little bit earlier, a lower rate on those pass-through companies. There is a sense that that will happen. We'll know a lot more on that budget committee vote that comes later on Tuesday. If Bob Corker votes no on that, and Ron Johnson is also on that committee, if they're both voting no, that's a major problem for Republicans, and that is not a good sign. That's not expected, though.
You know, the whole onus of this thing has been on the Republicans. There must be some Democrats somewhere who think tax cuts are a good thing for their constituents. Have you found any of them anywhere in Washington?
Well, I'm looking around. Not really, Pat. No. I mean, Joe Manchin was on the table at one point. It doesn't look like he's going to come around. Heidi Heitkamp as well from North Dakota, not looking like she's coming around either. And those were the two the White House wanted to get. So, no, Democrat votes are tough at this point. And, you know, part of the reason that Manchin and some other folks might not be on board is that there has been some spin in Democrat circles. Some would say it's not spin, it's facts, that it's going to hurt some of the middle class here. And so that'll be left to economists, and you can have Stephen Moore on to discuss all that. I'll just simply say that Manchin himself is hearing it a little bit there from West Virginia residents who are basically saying, well, wait a minute, is this going to hurt me in the middle class? And so I think he's getting some pushback there, and that's why he's not coming on board.
All right. Well, now, back to the one of the elephant in the room, so to speak, are these sexual allegations that are taking place. Roy Moore particularly, I understand the polls down in Alabama are getting very close. What do you hear?
Well, some of the recent polling is getting closer, but then again, let's be honest, Pat, let's throw all that polling out. I mean, at this point, no one really has any clue how this is going to go down on December 12th, and that's because there's a little bit of that factor where you may not want to admit to a pollster that you're going to vote for Roy Moore, but when that curtain closes, you indeed would vote for Roy Moore. And I think you might have, they call it the anti-Bradley effect, and we won't get into all of that, but you know about Bradley, Tom Bradley, the mayor in Los Angeles, and all of that. Anyhow, I think I just got in the weeds. But the point simply is that polls are very unreliable at this point. So the question then becomes, will evangelical Christians get out and vote for Roy Moore, or will they just stay at home? You know, there was the same problem, or at least conundrum, that Republicans had or evangelical Christians had with Donald Trump in 2016. And they said, you know what? We're going to take the macro view. We're not going to take the micro view. And they elected Donald Trump to the presidency of the United States. We'll see what happens with Roy Moore.
All right. One last question. In your own personal polling, what do you give the odds of this bill passing?
Oh, are you talking about tax reform, Pat?
Yeah, right. Tax reform.
99%, because ultimately it's all about preservation up here in Washington, D.C. As you said, safety of the majority, because let's face it, in 2018, if you're going to go to voters and say, well, you know what, we didn't pass Obamacare or repeal of that, and oh, by the way, we didn't pass tax reform either, well, that's game, set, match. You can crown Chuck Schumer majority leader at this point. You might as well just write that in. That's what will go down in 2018. So they've got to pass tax reform. And so ultimately it is about self-preservation. I think these guys get it done. These women and men get it done in the Senate.
David, I concur heartily, and I believe it's the truth. Self-preservation, they've got to know about it.